Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And this week we wanted to start with some listener questions.
Yeah, we're going to start with one from Deborah, who asked, how do you decide which source close to stories are legit? So she was referring to the story we were talking about last week about people... well, Prince Charles and Prince William referring to Harry and Meghan as being very fragile, and why do we place more value on those kind of stories than on stories about them having warm chats and those kind of things. So, I mean, it's not an exact science, and we are like, we don't have any sources, but from being long-time readers of gossip, we have kind of come up with a sort of system. So the sources are generally people that work in or around the royal household for different members of the royal family. So we always try to think, who does this story serve? So say, for example, if you have the story, the fragile story that we were talking about last week. So obviously that story is not serving Harry and Meghan. They don't want people to think they're fragile right now. But who would want the reader to think that Harry and Meghan are fragile? If we think Harry and Meghan are fragile, that puts the person who's saying it in a stronger position and makes them seem more stable, more diplomatic, and they're the ones that are benefiting from this. So we would think that that would be coming from either somebody in the Clarence House household or in the Kensington royal household. So that would be kind of how we would figure it out. We also, have read so much of this stuff that we've kind of figured out who likes to leak where. So there are certain people that we know that work at the Sun or the Mail or the Express or the Telegraph or the Times, all the different papers, who have become particular favourites of certain royals. Or in some instances, like Robert Jobson at the Evening Standard, he's written a biography of Prince Charles. So he was authorised to spend a lot of time with the people that work with Charles, and he's obviously built up sources there. So you can kind of join the dots when he reports on something that relates to Charles or anyone around Charles.
An example then of a story that could serve both sides. So this is the story of Andrew as the Queen's Rock. So it could be the Queen's people leaking that because she loves Andrew. Or it could be Andrew's people because they want to paint him in the more favourable light of being someone dependable and beloved by the beloved monarch.
Yeah, so, sometimes it's a bit trickier to figure out. And with those ones about warm chats and those kind of ones, those ones are less pointed and they're not trying to cast aspersions on somebody or portray somebody else in a questionable or negative light. So we do kind of see those as like a little bit less, if not legitimate, then interesting.
A question that is more up my street came from Abigail, who asked, how does the UK general public feel about Camilla? Unfortunately, Abigail, people don't like her.
People really, really don't like her. She is consistently voted one of the least popular, if not the least popular member of the royal family.
There was a YouGov poll last year that found that 34% of people have a negative opinion of the Duchess and only 29% have a positive opinion.
That rings so true to me. I feel like she's so divisive, like people really feel strongly that they don't like her. And one of the things Abigail was asking was like, if they don't like her, why don't they like her? And I really think it's the fact that she's not Diana, that people love Diana so much that she gets all the reverse of that. Yeah.
She's competing against a dead woman. She's never going to win.
And also the fact that she was a mistress. People really hold that against her.
Yeah.
And even though we're years and years on from that, people still won't forgive her. And, they also don't like Charles and wouldn't forgive him for it either. But she, as is age-old tale of sexism, she carries most of the blame, and people still don't want her to be queen consort when Charles becomes king. So I think she will become it, but we'll have to kind of wait and see. I'm sure there's going to be so much more about how people feel about Camilla when that eventuality comes around. And then finally, Jamie asked us, what's up with Kate's sleepless nights? So I think This has to do with the cover story in Us Weekly this week, which is an exclusive that's billed as Kate's side of the story.
So an insider told Us Weekly that Kate's in a panic and has been having bouts of anxiety. She barely has time to rest, and when she does try to sleep, her mind is constantly racing. She's already stretched pretty thin, and now she's really worried about how she'll juggle the extra workload on top of her family life.
I always find these Us Weekly exclusives, or sometimes the People exclusives, are sort of hard to parse, because I feel like Kate and Will care so much more about the British press and British public's perspective of them than they do about America. Like, we know Harry and Meghan are very invested in the American view of them. That's why we saw Meghan's friends being to People magazine last year. But with Kate and Will, it's still kind of hard to figure out what their interests are there. Like, obviously they want to be popular the world over, and you can kind of see that, you know, People and Us have done a lot of stories on Kate recently. She obviously sells really well for the magazines, but I'm not sure where this is coming from, because I don't know if it really benefits Kate to paint her as this kind of victim.
No, but I mean, it does enforce this like idea of them stepping up and them kind of having to really readjust their life and their duty to accommodate the whims of Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, I just feel like the Cambridges would like us to think of Kate as being totally effortless in everything she does, and that she will always rise to the occasion. And this, you know, while it also feeds into that narrative of the, you know, the white woman's tears, at the same time, I don't know that Kate would want people to think of her as somebody who is up all night worrying about work.
They prefer the "what can't she do" narrative.
But then at the same time, I guess it is more relatable, you know. Lots of people can't get to sleep because their mind is constantly racing, whether it's about royal duties or other duties. But Kate definitely has visibly stepped up. You know, I think this is probably more to do with the Andrew mess from November and them putting a lot of events in Kate's diary for future to kind of shift focus off of him. But it does double up as great press for the Cambridges right now and for the royal family just after Harry and Meghan have left. So we saw her do so many engagements in the last week.
Yeah. So one of them was on Wednesday. She visited Stockwell Gardens nursery and preschool, and this is when she brought the breakfast out to all the kids, which prompted the Sun to tweet, Kate Middleton arrives at nursery to serve kids breakfast. Is there anything she can't do? Which is quite a wild assertion, because one thing she couldn't do is close her own car door in that video. This was obviously to promote her 5 Big Questions survey, which has been going a week now, and over 100,000 people from all across the UK have already completed it.
According to Kate, she said she was really happy to hear that many people have taken it. I'm still totally confused by this, because from what we've heard, this survey is not geo-blocked. So when they say people from all across the UK have taken it, people from all across the world can take it. There's no restrictions. There's also no restrictions on how many times you can take it. So if you're like a super Cambridge stan, maybe you've taken it 50 times to get But I've also heard, now I don't know anything about like IP analytics and stuff, but supposedly after the fact you can separate the results on the back end and request only one response per IP address and do the geo-tracking to make sure you only get the UK results. Although that really does seem like a lot of work that could have been easily avoided if they just had some more limitations when you actually took the survey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not convinced by the survey itself. I don't quite understand the point, like what this data is going to help Kate do. I hope that they make that clear when it, after the month that it's active. I just feel like not having any demographic question in it. You know, you can filter by IP address, but you can't reflect all the other factors that would affect people's responses.
I just wish she could have just done all these engagements as engagements and not as this publicity tour for this survey.
Yeah.
Because they're strong enough on their own, and people really love all those pictures of Kate. And at the moment, it just looks like a bunch of photo ops for a survey that nobody really understands.
Like, the work is good, but the survey is possibly not so good. And that's a bad position to be in.
Kate's also in a bad position because we learned from the BBC that one of her earliest patronages, the Art Room, is closing down due to a lack of funding. This is a charity that offers art therapy to children to help boost their confidence and self-esteem, and Kate's been patron since 2012. But according to the BBC, the parent charity Place to Be has blamed financial pressures and shrinking school budgets, and now at least half of the 34 staff members are going to be made redundant. So this just looks terrible because, you know, I would think if the main job of royals on these kind of engagements is to draw attention to a cause, then the effect of that is to raise funding for that cause or that charity. So from what I can see, just from like looking back through Kate's engagements, she hasn't had any public engagements related to the Art Room since 2016 when she made a visit to one of them in Edinburgh. But I'm just wondering why hasn't Kate done any fundraising for it? Clearly she would have known that they were in trouble. You can assume they would reach out to their royal patron to help them out of this bind. And it just, it's a bad look for Kate, to be honest.
Yeah, it also, I think, throws up a slightly, well, to me, unexpected link, which is, you know, this like idea of shrinking school budgets. That becomes quite a political matter when you're talking about funding and cuts in education, especially in arts. I hadn't really viewed the Early Years project as having much of a clash with these kind of political arenas, but it's something that Kate might need to kind of watch out for in the future. Especially
because one of the engagements we saw her on this week was an art therapy visit to a children's hospital, Evelyn Children's Hospital in London. And, you know, if she already has a patronage that does things like that, couldn't she tie that to the 5 Big Questions survey? You know, it just seems like something more could have been done.
But it's not just paintings that Kate's been involved in. She's been back to her old photography habits.
Yeah, speaking of Kate's photos, we were going to talk about this last week, but we ended up cutting it. But the Daily Mail gave out a free calendar with their Sunday newspaper, which was billed as Kate's Cuties calendar. So we had seen ads in the paper for this for the last few weeks. But then when we got the paper, you actually had to go to Tesco to pick it up. And as much as I wanted Tom to go and pick up the Kate's Cuties calendar by himself at Tesco, he just wouldn't do it. So now we don't have it, unfortunately. But we did see pictures of it. And a lot of the pictures for the calendar are pictures that Kate has taken. And also, curiously, there were 2 photos of Meghan and Archie in this calendar.
That was so surprising to me. I thought that Meghan would absolutely, like, her blood would be boiling if she knew that pictures of her son were being used to sell copies of the Daily Mail.
Yeah, especially under the headline Kate's Cuties.
Yeah.
Kate's not even in these pictures. They're pictures of Meghan and Archie from the South Africa tour when Archie met Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I'm just so perplexed by this.
It seems like someone who is going to Tesco's to pick up their Kate's Cuties calendar isn't going to want to look at pictures of Meghan and Archie for 2 months out of the year.
But Lainey Gossip pointed out an interesting copyright issue with the pictures of Charlotte and George and Louis, that those pictures were taken to promote the Back to Nature Garden, and so they come with quite a complex copyright note that says the photographs shall not be used after December 31st, 2019 without prior permission from Kensington Palace. News editorial use only, no commercial use, no merchandising, advertising, souvenirs, memorabilia or colourably similar.
So this means that either the Daily Mail is in violation of the copyright or that they asked for and received special permission from Kensington Palace to use the photos. Why would the Cambridges be granting the Daily Mail permission to use pictures of their kids.
It's so strange because one of the big things about Will and Kate, certainly when, like, just after George was born, was that they were very protective over when they would allow them to be photographed, and they came to an agreement with the Royal Rota and the press pack about when they would be allowed to photograph them, and they were very strict about that. And, you know, as so many people in the public eye are, that they didn't want pictures of their kids going to school or walking around or whatever. And now to let them use photographs to sell copies of the Daily Mail, a newspaper that is being sued by Will's brother and sister-in-law, seems like a really shocking thing to do.
It's another bad look for the royal family.
It's just really disappointing. But onto Kate's other photographic pursuits this week. She revealed 2 new photo portraits to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day. So these are part of a larger project which was initiated by Jewish News, which is the biggest British Jewish publication, and Kate's photo is on the cover of the newest issue. And the project has photographers from the Royal Photographic Society, of which Kate is patron, photographing 75 survivors and their families.
So the first photo is of survivor Stephen Frank with his grandchildren Maggie and Trixie, and then the second one is of Yvonne Bernstein with her granddaughter Chloe. They were revealed on Instagram by Kensington Royal, who said, "It was a true honour to have been asked to participate in this project, and I hope in some way Yvonne and Stephen's memories will be kept alive as they pass the baton to the next generation."
I thought this was such a clever move. Like, we've heard so much about Kate's love of photography, and we've seen a lot of her portraits, particularly of Charlotte and Louis and George on their birthdays and things like that, so we know this is something she's really keen on. But this was such a smart way of applying that hobby and those skills to something that would garner like huge attention for a cause, because we've never seen her engaging with a cause through her photography. So it was a totally brand new thing, and I thought it was a fantastic idea.
She said in a statement that she wanted to emulate Anne Frank's sensitive and intimate depiction of the Holocaust, and her photos are also very influenced by Vermeer, the painter. You can kind of see it in the way she uses very dark backgrounds and then these very strikingly lit subjects.
We know Kate studied art history, and we know she's obviously very interested. She's patron of a number of arty things, so it makes a lot of sense that she would be taking inspiration from Vermeer. As well as that, there was a piece in Forward, the Jewish publication, by Irene Connolly, who noted that artists such as Vermeer evinced the belief that societal upheaval can be depicted most effectively through scenes of everyday life. And she also praised the thoughtful grace of Kate's portraits. One of the things she pointed out was how Kate had posed Frank holding a tin pot, which is both a domestic object and a memento of suffering. An accompanying statement notes that his mother brought the pot to Theresienstadt and used it to cobble together small meals, while Yvonne Bernstein shows her German identification card to her granddaughter, but its text and Nazi symbols are obscured from view. So Irene Connolly says that the photos demonstrate an acute awareness of the outside forces that disrupt family life but remain intently focused on the families themselves. I thought that was like a nice way of looking at it. And obviously the members of the Jewish community are really pleased with this. It really seemed like the royals did so much for Holocaust Memorial Day this year. It was the 75th anniversary, but there was a real group effort. We saw Camilla went to Poland, we saw Charles giving a speech, we saw Kate and Will out at a commemoration ceremony. So there was a lot of emphasis on it this year in a way that I thought was very thoughtful.
And of course, Kate is also helping to deflect attention from more scandalous royal news because Andrew is back in the papers.
Yeah, big Andrew news this week. The US prosecutor Jeffrey Berman said on Monday that both federal prosecutors and the FBI had asked to interview Andrew about Jeffrey Epstein, the dead billionaire paedophile, but had received no response despite his pledge to cooperate with the investigation. He said, The Southern District of New York and the FBI have contacted Prince Andrew's attorneys and requested to interview Prince Andrew, and to date, Prince Andrew has provided zero cooperation.
No, Andrew is not going to have any of this. A source close to Andrew told the Telegraph nothing could be further from the truth. The Duke is more than happy to talk to the FBI, but he hasn't been approached by them yet. He is angry about the way this is being portrayed and bewildered as to why this was said in New York. It seems certain people are jumping the gun. The source insisted that the Duke remained willing to assist the investigation and, as such, had been holding weekly meetings with his lawyers at Royal Lodge, which is his home in Windsor, and also at Buckingham Palace, in preparation of doing this. But he got a bit more defensive as the days went on, and on Sunday, the Telegraph reported that he accused the US prosecutors of failing to play with a straight bat.
Oh my god, you can just hear him, like, kind of spitting that out, can't you?
Yeah.
Royal sources have branded the whole move, talking about the zero cooperation, is a publicity stunt designed to pile on public pressure and force his hand, as if this is like something shameful.
Yeah.
When clearly this is something they need to do if they haven't been getting anything from him, any response at all. But supposedly the usual route of doing this would be that the prosecutors would make contact with Andrew via the US Embassy. But rather than that, they decided to try and contact his legal team directly. And now that Andrew has said that he would cooperate, they came out, a spokesman for the US Attorney's Office came out and said, I just feel it's appropriate to say we've made several attempts to contact his representatives. Which, yes, it is appropriate to say that because Andrew is being really evasive. But then he had his friends running to the Telegraph to big him up, saying that he accepts he made a big mistake by continuing to see Epstein after he was convicted and for not showing sufficient empathy for the girls involved. He is desperate to make up for it and is committed to the legal process. He also wants to clear things up so that he can continue to support the Queen in her hour of need. Ugh. She has obviously had a bad year with Prince Philip frail at 98 and Harry and Meghan leaving for Canada. The Duke has always been the Queen's favourite and she is relying on him a lot behind the scenes.
Oh, his, absolute reliance on crawling back to mummy at all times is so horrible. And
it's such entitlement.
Once again, we get this story of, he's such a rock. He's the support of the Queen. The Queen couldn't possibly function without him.
But I thought it was kind of interesting that even though the palace didn't release a statement about this, several aides were apparently quick to distance the Queen from this whole mess. They pointed out that Andrew was no longer a working royal and he was effectively operating in silo.
Ooh.
Whether or not he cooperates with the FBI is a matter for Prince Andrew and his lawyers alone, one said firmly.
So the Daily Mail reported on a message that Andrew had sent his friend and business associate, Jonathan Rowland, who's the son of David Rowland, who
we talked about
a
few weeks ago.
So this is a text that he had sent him in 2011, just days after the Virginia Roberts allegations were made public for the first time. So Jonathan wrote, "Hope the press isn't getting you down too much." And Andrew replies, "Not at all. She is a very sick girl, apparently. The innuendo is the problem, but there is nothing that one can do for that. Shrug and move on." Shrug and move on. I'm so glad that we're starting to get, we've only in the last year started to get a backlash to Andrew and some kind of proof that he can't just keep shrugging and moving on with everything, that hopefully there is now a possibility of things catching up to him.
Yeah, and this is the second time we've heard of private correspondence he's had with somebody. After the BBC documentary last year revealed that he had sent that, really late night message to Ghislaine Maxwell saying he had a few questions for her about Virginia Roberts, and now we've got this revolting comment he's making. She's a very sick girl, apparently. That is just textbook, men who try to decry their exes or women who've rebuffed them as crazy or sick or anything to diminish them and dismiss them. it's so shocking that the claims she was making were in one part about Andrew, but also about Epstein. And it's so shocking that he would say she is a very sick girl, apparently, rather than he is a very sick man, apparently. You know, all the things that were coming out about Epstein at that time, and he decides to lay all this judgment on Virginia and not on Epstein is so telling of his mindset and his perspective on all of this, and makes him look really, really bad.
Yeah. It makes it even worse that he is the Queen's favourite, and that, you know, she is so concerned about protecting him from all of these things. But, you know, apparently she's very embarrassed, according to a source speaking to The Sun, who said, "The Queen has been hurt by all the criticism of Andrew far more than the fuss about Harry and Meghan breaking away from the family. The reason, quite simply, is that Andrew has always been her favourite son, not least because she spent more time with him than any of her other 3 children." Even more than Edward? Like, you'd expect Edward to be the little baby favourite, but what is it about Andrew that she loves so much?
I know, this, like, mantra, Andrew is the favourite son, Andrew is the favourite son, just keeps coming up over and over again. But they really laboured it. The source, when they said her family noticed that she had become warmer, more relaxed, which wasn't always the case when she was bringing up Charles and Anne. She's also very proud of how he conducted himself in the Navy and his time spent at the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. And later, when he was serving on HMS Invincible, Andrew effectively became the royal family's very own war hero because of his bravery in the Falklands. The Queen felt a huge surge of maternal pride about how he conducted himself, putting his life on the line for his country. Like, the first thing that occurred to me here was, like, didn't Prince Harry also do this? And where was her maternal pride for him when she was stripping him of his military associations?
Yeah.
You know, if that's how they think, then surely he is also the royal family's very own war hero.
Yeah, you'd think, but you never get any sense that Harry is a favourite. It's always Andrew. I mean, can you imagine how, like, Edward must feel? I mean, no one ever thinks of Edward, but, like...
I mean, the source thinks of Edward. They went on saying, as for the noise surrounding Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, she feels embarrassed on his behalf. No mother wants to hear stories about a son's sexual relationships with very young women. She feels particularly bad that Andrew has given up so much of the work, especially his charities and military roles, because he was carrying out those duties on her behalf and doing them very well. She will always protect Andrew, and they often talk on the phone or when he is at Buckingham Palace, where he still has a flat. They speak far more with each other than Edward, Charles or Anne. Like,
if I was Edward, I'd be like, sorry, you expect me to step up and fill the Harry and Meghan void, and you're going to constantly have this narrative about favourite sons? Like, it's so weird. I feel like we've now been saying this thing about the favourites for so long, it's sort of become normal, but it's very weird for a family to be so open about which children are the best children.
Especially when it's someone who is fucking up so spectacularly. Yeah. And to have whoever this source is really hammering it home, she will always protect Andrew. Yeah. He is the favourite. Like, they talk on the phone all the time. Like, it's so ridiculous.
But Charles is not happy with it, predictably. So according to The Sun, he had an emergency meeting with the Queen less than 24 hours after the news broke that Andrew wasn't helping the FBI. And Emily Andrews reports they took time out from royal estate business at Sandringham to chat about family matters. And a royal source said both had hoped the Duke of York could perhaps be rehabilitated back into public life in time, but that is now looking increasingly unlikely.
I mean, it is exceedingly unlikely that Charles would ever want Andrew to be rehabilitated back into public life. Definitely, like, this both had hoped. Absolutely no way in hell did Charles hope. Bullshit. Charles, this to me reads as Charles trying to shut down the Queen's absolutely terrible PR moves. Yeah. He saw them going to church the day after the Sussex departure news was finalised, and he fucking got on the phone straight away and was like, Mummy, this has got to stop. Take that shit-eating grin on your face. This is honestly doing so much damage to the royal family that may not be reparable, you know? Yeah. And it's just so stunning that she keeps acting like this. And again, we're seeing Charles as the one who has to act decisively and step up and say, listen, this is how it's got to be. This is how it happened after Andrew gave that interview, and it was allegedly Charles who was the one who said he's got to go. And the Queen was like, no.
And then they sort of backtracked on all of that. So I wonder if they'll have to backtrack on this again. But in the meantime, it seems like Sophie and Edward didn't quite cut the mustard as replacements for Harry and Meghan, because we might be due to see Beatrice and Eugenie as the next contenders for the title.
Yeah, before that, we should mention that we did get a little update on Beatrice's wedding, this most troubled royal wedding planning in history. According to the Mail, the Queen has offered to hold Beatrice's wedding reception at Buckingham Palace later this year. So we had heard it might be in Windsor or it might be in Italy, but now we're hearing it's almost definitely going to be in London. One friend said, Bea was delighted and very grateful to accept. It was a really special gesture, as it will be the first wedding celebration at Buckingham Palace since William and Catherine's in 2011.
Yeah, I mean, it also means that the Queen doesn't have to leave the house.
Like, that's a pretty nice way of spinning it, because it does seem like a consolation prize from the big Windsor wedding.
To go to Italy. I would have loved that.
But, you know, maybe eventually we'll get a date for this wedding, which we're pretty sure is going to be taking place in June. But that date that we were supposed to hear about after Christmas has still not been revealed. But in the meantime, we have heard Robert Lacey, the royal biographer and historical consultant for the Crown, telling Hello that he thinks Beatrice and Eugenie are going to be the new Harry and Meghan.
Well, there we go. So he says, if two go out, two have got to come in. And those two have got to be Beatrice and Eugenie. I'm sure they will step forward and be greatly welcomed. It's what the family needs, as it's another 15 years before Prince George's generation steps up. It's ironic that Harry mentioned his cousins as models of how he wants to be.
I mean, it is ironic, and it's frustrating as well, because Jack Brooksbank just gets on with his tequila company, and he goes to these, like, parties and everything, and nobody says a thing about it, because, I mean, no disrespect, but nobody cares about this man. And Edo is still doing tons of interviews about his property developments. He's getting long features everywhere talking about his lavish buildings and all this stuff. But Harry and Meghan aren't allowed to do that. You know, that would be seen as tacky if they were to start a tequila company with George Clooney.
I feel like there's also a sense of, like, impatience from Robert Lacey here, when he's like, it's another 15 years before Princess George's generation steps up these lazy children to get on with it. But it does put a kind of end to this talk about how the monarchy is totally fine, completely fine without Harry and Meghan, because there's so much worry about filling this gap.
Yeah, we, like, at the same time as we're getting these people saying, oh, it's going to be Sophie and Edward, or it's going to be Beatrice and Eugenie, or whoever, there's also people like the really establishment royal reporters and authors, like the Queen's biographer Sally Bedell Smith, who said this week, Meghan and Harry are gone, but it's as if nothing has happened. With the exception of their absence, it feels like the monarchy is in full flying under all flags and steaming ahead, which I've never heard that expression before. It's so decadent.
Yeah, it seems like just put in as much, like, vaguely military language as possible.
Like, it also just seems so over the top, given that you've got one side rushing to be like, we got to fill the gap, and the other side being like, what gap? There's no gap. We're delighted Harry and Meghan are gone. Everybody's really stepped into their own now that Harry and Meghan are out of the picture. Like, which is it, you know? But speaking of Robert Lacey and people who work on the Crown, we got a very unexpected update this week about the future of the Crown.
So the showrunner, Peter Morgan, announced Imelda Staunton was going to be taking over as the Queen in the 5th and final season. What happened to season 6?
Peter Morgan had always said that he had envisaged The Crown as being 6 seasons long, and that there would be a different cast per every 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And we now hear that actually, no, this is when it's going to stop. He's now saying that season 5 is the perfect time and place to stop. I am so suspicious about this. you know, he has spoken a lot about it, and that he didn't intend on covering the Harry and Meghan stuff at all, and that we were unlikely to get that much about Will and Kate either. He had said before that he feels uncomfortable writing about events within a certain time period. I think there's a certain amount of time within which if you write about it, what you do instantly becomes journalistic because it's too close to the moment. And he was saying, let's wait 20 years and see what there is to say about Meghan Markle. I don't know what there is to say about Meghan Markle at the moment. I wouldn't know and I wouldn't presume. She'll only become interesting once we've had 20 years to digest who she is and what her impact has been. I've got nothing to say about Meghan Markle, which is like very definite. But at the same time, I don't see why they're cutting it at 5.
No, I mean, we were talking off air about the symmetry of it. Very basic level, like having one season at the end just seems so messy.
Especially because it usually takes you most of the season to get used to the new cast, as it did with season 3.
Yeah.
So Imelda Staunton and whoever else is going to be in the cast are really at a disadvantage there. But he has previously said, Peter Morgan has previously told The Hollywood Reporter that he already knows how it's going to end. Last year, he said, something has already happened that I think is the end. But you can't ever say what the end is because things change. The minute things change historically, you begin to have to respond in some shape or form, even in your thinking. But he said he does have an idea. I think I know what the idea is.
Oh my God, what is it?
I think, because he said Imelda Staunton is going to take the crown into the 21st century, but not very far into the 21st century. And we know Peter Morgan is obsessed with the relationship between the Queen and Princess Margaret. And in 2002, we saw the deaths of the Queen Mum and Princess Margaret. And I think that's going to be, to him, the perfect narrative conclusion. Because in the Queen's Christmas message that year, she referred to the death of her mother, but she didn't say anything about Princess Margaret, supposedly because she was worried she would become too emotional. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is just exactly Peter Morgan's sweet spot, that kind of a scene to write.
Yeah. Because
we've already seen him, you know, do the whole aftermath of Diana's death in the film The Queen, so he can't end it there.
Yeah.
It's got to go a little bit further, and I think that's going to be it.
Yeah, you can see as well how it will be a good point to kind of imply that the focus would be pivoting to the younger royals with this kind of death of 2 members of the older generation, so that makes a lot of sense. But if it's ending in 2002, will we see Andrew and his friendship with Epstein?
I know, the Virginia Roberts incident is alleged to have happened in 2001, so that'll be a very notable exclusion if it is excluded.
I don't think he's going to mention it at all.
I mean, I just think it'd be something that would be so hard to cover comprehensively if you have to end it after that, and we don't find, you know, if we don't get his Newsnight interview or her statements, or, you know, the reaction when it became public, any of that stuff. But I also have conspiracy theory about why it's ending. Okay, what say you of this? That Harry and Meghan, although we know Harry is working with Apple, what if Harry and Meghan have made a Netflix deal, as Netflix have said they're interested in working with Harry and Meghan? What if they made a Netflix deal on the condition that The Crown would stop? Because we know that Harry is not a fan of The Crown, that he wanted to stop before it got to present day. And what if that were the terms of their contract? In order to get a production deal with the Sussexes, you've got to kill The Crown.
I love that theory. I believe that theory. I don't really believe it, but I want to believe it.
I want to believe it too. I also am, you know, paranoid about whether the palace has been putting pressure on. You know, why would they end it? I just don't see, unless he's gotten totally bored of it and just wants it to end.
This guy's done nothing but write about the royal family. He's not suddenly got bored of it, surely.
And I saw some reports saying that the show hasn't been getting the best ratings for Netflix, and that maybe they would rather focus their finances on something new.
They love doing new stuff because it gets more people in.
They also love awards, and The Crown is one of the only shows they have at the moment that gets any traction in awards season. So I think they like having it as their prestige drama. And it also has a huge cultural impact when it comes out. Even if it doesn't make the top 10 shows of the year on Netflix, people talk about it like crazy.
We talk about it like crazy. Speaking of talking like crazy, though, it's time for our quote of the week.
Yeah, for me, it's got to be this demented quote from Samantha Markle. So we haven't wanted to talk about the like rubbish that Thomas Markle has been saying in various documentaries about Meghan. But Samantha Markle has. She came out and said, "My God, without him, she would be a waitress at best."
To talk that way about a duchess.
These people have no self-awareness whatsoever.
Yeah.
What about you, Tom? What's your quote of the week?
Well, I was very excited to see the return of our favourite polo hunk, Nacho Figueras, who was once again speaking up for Harry. So this was on ABC, the US network. They had a special on Harry and Meghan, which featured an interview with Nacho. And he's like a long-time friend and basically like public advocate for
Hype man.
How brilliant Harry is. He's always got not just one nice thing to say about him, but like a whole speech prepared and tucked in his pocket. But he said of Harry, he has suffered a lot for all the things that have happened to him. He suffers a lot from people judging him. He's being a father, a guy who's trying to protect his cub and his lioness from whatever it takes. He has become an incredible man, a man that his mother would be proud of. He wants to live a normal as normal as his life is going to be, right? Because when you have 1,000 paparazzi outside your house in Canada waiting to get one picture of your son, that's not very, very normal. And I agree, Nacho.
Do you think he was authorised to speak on this ABC special by Prince Harry?
I mean, I think he is in a permanent state of wanting to speak about Harry, and I feel like, yeah, he's like kept on a leash until it's the perfect moment.
I feel like discretion is so important for Harry that he wouldn't be close friends with somebody who was talking about him this much if he wasn't happy with it.
Yeah. Who is your fit for queen?
Well, it's got to be Kate. We saw her out so much this week with mixed results. But my favourite was her outfit at the Holocaust Memorial Day service on Monday. This to me was absolutely flawless Kate drag. So it was a repeat. It was a Catherine Walker dress, grey dress with black velvet collar, some velvet buttons, and a full pleated skirt. Also, it looked so much better than the last time we saw it because she was wearing sheer tights instead of opaque ones. Like, hallelujah, finally. It looks so heavy with those opaque tights, but I thought it looked just gorgeous, and her hair was incredible as usual. But as well as that, everything she was wearing, from the jewellery to the shoes, was all stuff that we'd seen before. So in that way, that's very respectful that, she looked incredible, but she wasn't drawing attention away from it with like a big new splashy dress or earrings or whatever. But as much as I loved that outfit, the next day was like crashing down to earth.
Yeah.
When she visited Evelyn at Children's Hospital, and she brought back this skirt suit that we had seen last February for the first time at a mental health in education conference. And the problem with this skirt suit, apart from it being very unsuitable for the windy conditions that day, is that it was designed by Dolce Gabbana.
Why does she continue to wear? Why is she being put in Dolce & Gabbana still?
Yeah, a lot of people asked us about this, and we're not happy about it. She wore Dolce & Gabbana to Wimbledon this year as well. And, we should mention that this is particularly notable because Dolce & Gabbana is still very much tainted by a huge racism scandal from 2018. So, you can read a lot of great writing about this online, but just the basics are that before this big catwalk show they were doing in Shanghai, they shared a number of ads on social media, one of which showed a Chinese model trying to eat spaghetti, pizza and cannoli with chopsticks, and they had this voiceover that was like pronouncing the words deliberately incorrectly in a way that would mock Chinese speech, and it was totally trading on old stereotypes about Chinese people, and immediately people were really offended by it and objected to it very publicly. eventually they had to cancel their catwalk show. And on Instagram, Diet Prada, which is like this fashion industry watchdog, shared screenshots of like extremely racist direct messages that Stefano Gabbana, one of the designers, had allegedly sent to someone who had criticised the ads. Now, Dolce Gabbana later claimed that his account was hacked, which no one believed.
Defense, yeah.
And they did release this very kind of corporate official apology for it. But like crucially, they haven't taken any steps at all to address this like massive ignorance and intolerance. You know, we've seen other brands like Prada and Gucci who have also had racism scandals in recent years. They have done a lot to set up like a diversity council to prevent stuff like this ever happening again. Whereas D&G have seemed very obstinate about it. And, you know, that they're known, the designers, both Dolce and Gabbana, are known for being kind of assholes. And they have a reputation for saying really nasty things in public about like the Kardashians, Selena Gomez, a load of people. But lots of like A-list, like top tier celebrities have been wearing D&G. You know, in the last few weeks, we've seen Blake Lively, Lupita Nyong'o, Gwen Stefani, Emilia Clarke, who is an ambassador for D&G, like wearing them on the red carpet. And, you know, they clearly have been rehabilitated in some sense in the celebrity world, but that's not good enough for a royal.
No, we always hear from all across the board this thing that royals should be held to a higher standard, and, you know, they should. It doesn't make sense for Kate to be wearing this brand. She has a stylist. She has presumably some kind of awareness of what's going on, and this is such a bad look anyway, but it's a terrible look when
right
you
now
just ousted the one person of colour in your family.
I know, when there's already a narrative circulating about the royal family and racism, don't wear a designer so closely associated with racism.
Yeah.
Like, basics. Just don't do it. Like, and you know, this wasn't even an outfit that seemed perfect for this occasion. As I said, it was blown all over the place. If you watch the photos from this event, just from her walk from the car, like, it was totally unsuitable for that. And as well, it was very dark, as we talked last week about how usually the royals wear more vibrant things when they're meeting with children, especially when she was doing like art and stuff. It was too formal. It was such a strange choice, and I think she absolutely fucked it up, and she needs to stop wearing Dolce & Gabbana.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing for Emilia Clarke or whatever to do it, and she shouldn't do it either, but for someone in the royal family, somebody who we constantly hear like takes great care in everything she does.
Yeah.
For instance, this weekend when the BAFTAs are on, the narrative that the palace are pushing is about, you know, what Kate's going to wear, because supposedly the red carpet has this new sustainable dress code, and is Kate going to rewear something? And, you know, in the past they've said the focus shouldn't be on her clothes, it should be on her work, but now they're putting all the focus on her clothes, when just a few days ago she completely like fucked it with what she was wearing. Which is why I cannot endorse her as first in line this week.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, who is your first in line this week?
I mean, nobody acquitted themselves like tremendously well this week, but up there for me is Princess Eugenie.
Okay,
I'm going to tell you why, Tom, because we got our first Instagram post from Princess Eugenie, who's the only member of the royal family with a public personal Instagram account. And it was her first post since November, when all the Andrew stuff started kicking off, and it was a TBT to her engagement announcement 2 years ago. But more than that, Tom, it was a declaration of intent.
Yeah.
This was taken by all the tabloids as Eugenie saying she's back, she wants a bigger role, she's ready to step into the limelight, she's ready to fill Harry and Meghan's shoes, with or without her tequila man. As well as that, she, you know, I'm just reminded of how narrowly she escaped all of the hell of this wedding drama that Beatrice is suffering right now. And yeah, Eugenie totally got away with it.
She lucked out, but also she seems like the only member of this entire family with some shred of common sense, in that she's just shut up for the last few months.
And has not been seen hanging out with Andrew. She hasn't been getting her sources running to the paper talking about what an amazing father and lover of women he is. She understands that this is harmful to her own work with anti-trafficking organisations, and she's just keeping a lid on it. And for that reason now, she's getting all this great press from people like Robert Lacey saying that she'd be a great alternative to Harry and Meghan, which, you know, I don't believe, but it's good for her.
Yeah, it's great for her. And, you know, I'd say the royal family, if they realise that, will snap her up, take her up on the offer.
And not to sound too calculating about it, but a pregnancy would go a long way.
Yeah.
But, you know, not prescribing anything. do you, Eugenie.
Well, what have we got coming up this next week?
So I don't think we're going to get to cover the BAFTAs tonight, but we'll have as much as we can next week because, guys, brace yourselves, because the British Film Academy certainly are.
Because Will has finally learned what racism is and has heard the word diversity, and he is very pleased with himself. No, he is apparently going to be making a speech in which he expressed his concerns about the lack of diversity, the all-white nominations at BAFTA. And he has privately expressed his concerns, according to the Sunday Times, to the chief executive of BAFTA.
But as if that wasn't enough, he's going to blow the fucking roof off the place tonight with this speech. A source told Dan Wootton at The Sun, execs are braced for his speech. Amanda, the chief executive of BAFTA, is panicked. There are shockwaves.
Will's shockwaves.
I mean, this is such an eye roll. This just reminds me of when he was fed up and bored with racism in football there a few months ago. Like, he's fine with talking about racism in certain arenas and absolutely not in others.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way as a strategy for them to be calling out racism in other long-running British institutions, but it seems like incredibly blind in another way. Like, it seems like total hypocrisy. And even if you were to not want to bring the Harry and Meghan stuff into it, even just Kate's Dolce Gabbana outfit, you know, he needs to be having this conversation with his own household.
As well as that, the coverage of his board comments was so rapturous that I'm sure literally anything he says will be praised, even though to be frank, I think he's probably going to say diversity is really important in our world and we should all strive to do better in future, and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
I would be stunned if he went any stronger than that.
Yeah.
And I would still think he was a hypocrite, even if he did. We will also see Kate and Will carrying out a number of engagements in Wales on Tuesday when they go to the Mumbles and Port Talbot. And then on Wednesday, Will be out with some football guys.
You know so much about football.
At a special event in London to launch the Heads Up Weekends ahead of Time to Talk Day on Thursday. So lots more Will and Kate. Hopefully we'll get a few more outings from Camilla and Charles, and maybe an update on Harry and Meghan.
Surprise appearance or a Instagram drop.
But in the meantime, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at AirheadsPod and on Facebook at Airheads. And if you want to send us a question, you can also email us at airheadspod@gmail.com.
If you like the episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts and tell a friend.
And we hope you'll come back and join us next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth. Would you be willing to testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked?
Well, I'm like everybody else, and I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so.